A reading from Psalm 86. Hear me, Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Guard my life, for I am faithful to you. Save your servant who trusts in you. You are my God. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I call to you all day long. Bring joy to your servant, Lord, for I put my trust in you. You, Lord, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you. Hear my prayer, Lord. Listen to my cry for mercy. When I am in distress, I call to you because you answer me. Among the gods, there is none like you, Lord. No deeds can compare with yours. All the nations you have made will come and worship before you, Lord. They will bring glory to your name, for you are great and do marvelous deeds. You alone are God. Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart, that I may fear your name. I will praise you, Lord my God, with all my heart. I will glorify your name forever, for great is your love towards me. You have delivered me from the depths, from the realm of the dead. Arrogant foes are attacking me, O God. Ruthless people are trying to kill me. They have no regard for you. But you, Lord, are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Turn to me and have mercy on me. Show your strength in behalf of your servant. Save me because I serve you just as my mother did. Give me a sign of your goodness, that my enemies may see it and be put to shame. For you, Lord, have helped me and comforted me. This is the word of the Lord.
Hey friends, my name is Scott Gerbrandt. I'm part of the teaching team here at the meeting place. Welcome to Sunday. You enjoying yourself so far? Yes. Excellent. Have you been enjoying the summer series, Summer of 66, where we've been looking at the various different forms of literature forms of text that we find in the Bible. This collection of books, these 66 books that we call the Bible. I hope you've been enjoying it. I certainly have been. Really appreciate how Bob and Precious and Ryan and Nicole have been leading us through this session. We've been looking at first the books of the law. We've done a little bit of that. And then we talked about historical books. And now today we are diving and dipping our toe into wisdom literature and poetry. So they thought, why not? Scott's really, no. Let's confess. My confession is this. In grade 12, the only course I almost failed was core English. And when I went to Bible school, I was required to take a course that essentially meant that I had to learn how to read and write. So here we go. That's my confession in terms of my qualifications for this. But we're going to go and dive into this nonetheless, and it should be good. So first, let me ask the question. When you think of poetry, what do you think of? You think of Shakespeare. Excellent. Well, for me, it goes straight to this. Roses are red, violets are blue. I don't know how to end this. Do you? Right, exactly. Or when you think about wisdom, what do you think about? Knowing how to live the good life? For me, I think often when I think of wisdom, I attribute it to a particular people or a moment in my life. And when I reflect back on it, I think, what makes that moment a wise moment? Or what does that person, what makes them particularly wise? But often we have our common phrases, and perhaps you have seen this common phrase, or maybe it has been told to you, but a common phrase that you might be hearing is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Have you heard that one before? What is your favorite common wisdom quote? I asked Jana, my wife, earlier this week, asked which one comes first to her mind, and it's July, mind you, but the first one that came to her mind was don't eat yellow snow. Very wise words, very, very helpful. So anyways, these are kind of like, at first blush, how I kind of engage some of these texts. I go, oh, maybe I don't know what's going on here, or it's very surface. But we are going to dive in and try to get into a little bit about wisdom literature and how to read it, and a little bit around poetry and how to read that in the Bible. And so I think what I want to say right here at the start is that while each book of Scripture is distinct and complete, it is helpful to understand that the collection of these books, all 66, are in dialogue with each other. Really important to remember that. And it's particularly, this kind of framing is particularly helpful when we start looking first at wisdom literature. And we're going to kind of go really quickly here through Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. So let's first start with Proverbs. In essence, Proverbs, the message is God is wise and just. When you read Proverbs, you get the sense that life is fair and you get what you deserve. If you sow goodness, you get goodness. If you sow evil, you get evil. It's kind of the rhythm and cadence of Proverbs. In chapters 1 to 9, wisdom is an attribute of God who is personified in Lady Wisdom, who is available to all, and one who is doing rightly is accessing wisdom. One who's not doing rightly is opposing wisdom, opposing God. Probably most commonly when you think of Proverbs, you think of like that long list of short and common phrases. And so that is basically in chapters 10 to 31. And let me just give you some quick guides. If you ever found yourself confused in reading some of these things, here's some really helpful tips. Proverbs are often parabolic, and they can be very specific and have exaggerated language. That's kind of how poetry works. Proverbs are worded to be memorable, not technically precise. The third thing I would say is a good tip is Proverbs strongly is reflecting ancient culture. And you'll probably hear me say this again later, but whenever we come to the biblical text, it is always a cross-cultural experience. And so you need to bear that in mind when you're reading these different quips and these different sayings. And finally, I would want to say that Proverbs are not a guarantee from God. When you read in Proverbs 9, 10 to 12, it is summarized this way. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through wisdom your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. And this is an example, and really the heart of the book of Proverbs, really saying that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Let's move on to Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes, we get a little bit of a shock. And really, the text here feels really difficult to understand often, because really, when you start reading it, you go, life isn't fair. And it leads to this question, is God just? Is God wise? Really, there's three kind of broad, disturbing kind of movements in our topics that Ecclesiastes is getting at. And you may be familiar with these, which is life is short, our life is here and then gone, everyone dies, and life seems random. And it is in this text that we find in the end that the fear of the Lord, very similar to what we hear in Proverbs, is what is paramount. Hold all things with an open hand, do what is right and good, and be open and attentive to the simple moments, the simple pleasures of God, or of life. God is just. And in Ecclesiastes 12, we read in verses 13 and 14, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all humans. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. That's the conclusion of Ecclesiastes. Let's move on to Job. And we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but essentially, I would say Job is about the statement that God is God. Job then also in this story becomes an exemplar of humility and one who fears the Lord. Job is seen for his humility, and he's seen because he is struggling with the angst and the pain and the tests that he experiences through this story that we read. And so when I summarize these three texts, we are leaning into the primary message that the wisdom literature, being that from the very beginning, wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And having the right orientation towards God and the pursuit of God, good and right, mature living, is possible even in pain and suffering. It shows us how to live. And simply put, I would say it like this: God is God and I am not. Read, look, listen. All around you, God, wisdom, is showing and telling you how to live. This is the message of the wisdom literature. And sometimes we get a little twisty when we forget that God is God and I am not. All right, we're going to move on to poetry. Poetry in the Bible. Psalms and songs of songs. Now, what I want to say here is that poetry is actually in lots of places throughout the whole Bible. And in fact, a fun fact that I had found out earlier is really the Bible consists of about 30% of poems. So when you read at the beginning, even in the narratives, when you are reading about Moses, you'll see that someone is breaking out in a song or a poem. And we see this also in the New Testament as well. Poetry is everywhere in the Bible. It is in the narratives and of the characters breaking out in song. Poems are embedded in the letters and in other texts. And so we're going to just take a really brief look at Song of Songs. And really the short response I want to say here is Song of Songs is a collection of love poems showcasing God's gift of love. It is a collection to be understood to be in the wisdom tradition of Solomon. And it weaves verse after verse about love, attraction, and desire between two lovers. It is racy if you've taken your time to read it. And it concludes that the gift of love is from God, and it is powerful and great. How do we interpret, how do we kind of engage Song of Songs? Really, I want to just highlight three kind of ways forward with it. The Jewish tradition would understand this text as an allegory between Israel and God. In the Christian tradition, often it has been seen as an allegory of the church and Christ. But more recently, it has been understood as just as it presents itself, a collection of love poems that is pointing to the divine gift of love. And I would encourage you, if you take time to read this, to take special note of the imagery, again, in this text. It is rich with garden language, and then I would invite you to think about where else in the Bible do I read about gardens? And you may remember the Garden of Eden. The Psalms. In short, the Psalms is a prayer book, and it is meant to meet a prayer book to help us meet with God and to hear the story of God throughout all of history. I really appreciate how Joel has oriented us towards the Psalms, even in his short kind of comments this morning. It is the place where we meet God, and it expresses all of the emotions of the human experience. These collection of songs have been gathered and collected in this one place, and they are meant to be read in community. They are meant to be read in public, to be sung in the church, in the places of worship, and in our homes. Because we're not doing roses are red, violets are blue, let us talk just a little bit about the structure of and some forms and metaphors of the book of Psalms. So first what I want to say is the book of Psalms is free verse, not like what we would typically note as that rhyme and rhythm, that very simple poem that I started off with. There's lots of refrains and repetitions. And a thing to specially note is the form and the work of couplets. So you'll see I hope you heard, and we're going to read it again today, I hope you heard in the Psalm 86, listen for the couplets. You'll notice that often there'll be a starting line, and then there'll be a second line underneath that does essentially one of three things. Either it expands the concept that's being stated in that first line, or it brings some sort of contrast, or it is deepening that thought. The other thing I want to say about the Psalms is there's various different types or forms within the Psalms. There's the form of lament, confession, praise, and thanksgiving. And just very quickly, what I would say about lament is that it is an expression of disappointments and struggle with God. And I think this is one of the reasons why we are so attracted and so encouraged to go to the Psalms when we are experiencing various different emotions. The final thing that I want to say to help us kind of think about how to read the Psalms is, and maybe it just is plainly obvious, and that is of metaphors. So the Psalms and poetry is always very, very rich with metaphor. And I would encourage you to start thinking about where have I seen metaphors, or where have I seen other places in the biblical text that is being mentioned here in this poem. Because this is often what happens. Often the metaphors that are used are not common to what we experience in our common day here and now, but they are actually found within the biblical narrative. A good example of this is if you read the Psalms, you will find in many places this imagery of waters being tumultuous and dangerous, chaos. And you will find places where the repetition and metaphor of God is my rock, dry land. And you get the sense that these metaphors are actually reenacting even the first chapters of the biblical text in Genesis, where God is forming and bringing to order from chaos to order in the great creation of all things. So we have to listen for these things and be attentive to them. So with that in mind, I actually want to reread Psalm 86. And just like Joel kind of proposed to us, I want you to settle in. I want you to close your eyes. If you didn't close your eyes the first time when Gloria read it, close your eyes this time. And just let these words soak in. Where do these words find you in this moment? Where does your current story, your current circumstances, come into alignment or feel in dissonance with? Pay attention to that. Let's read this together. And I also want you to pay particular attention. Listen for the way of wisdom. It's in there. All right. Psalm 86. Hear me, Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Guard my life, for I am faithful to you. Save your servant who trusts in you. You are my God. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I call to you all day long. Bring joy to your servant, Lord, for I put my trust in you. You, Lord, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you. Hear my prayer, Lord. Listen to my cry for mercy. When I am distressed, I call to you because you answer me. Among the gods, there is none like you, Lord. No deeds can compare with yours. All the nations you have made will come and worship before you, Lord. They will bring glory to your name, for you are great and do marvelous deeds. You alone are God. Teach me your ways, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart, that I might fear your name. I will praise you, Lord my God, with all my heart. I will glorify your name forever. For great is your love towards me. You have delivered me from the depths, from the realm of the dead. Arrogant foes are attacking me, O God. Ruthless people are trying to kill me. They have no regard for you. But you, Lord, are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Turn to me and have mercy on me. Show your strength on behalf of your servant. Save me because I serve you, just as my mother did. Give me a sign of your goodness, that my enemies may see it and be put to shame. For you, Lord, have helped me and comforted me. How did this rereading capture your imagination? What emotions were evoked? In what ways does it remind you of God's story in history and in your life and your circumstances now? Biblical poetry is less about getting the facts and information and more about evoking these emotions and imagination in a way that creatively sees and engages the biblical themes and concepts and the grand story of God. So, how do we read wisdom and poetry in the Bible? And I basically want to suggest 4 ways. Really simply, the first one is slowly. Take your time. Soak in the words. I know that many of us have practiced a contemplative prayer practice called Lectio Divina, which is basically just means holy reading. And often this contemplative prayer practice is the reading of a particular scripture text, and then you sit in silence just to meditate on it, soak on it, not dissect it, not try to pick it apart, just let it wash over you. So yes, how do we read wisdom and poetry? Slowly. The second thing that I would say is we read it curiously. My invitation to you here is don't immediately assume that you know the meaning or the context of the metaphor. If you need to do some learning, go for it. You need to do some research, look at it. Like I said before, reading the biblical text is always a cross-cultural experience, every time. The third way that I would suggest on how do we read wisdom and poetry is fully and repetitively. And what I mean by this is read it in its whole context. Read the whole psalm. Read the whole text to kind of get a better sense of what is going on, to place it within its correct place. And read it over and over again. Often it is dangerous to read little snippets of verses out of context. And the last thing that I would say, and you've kind of heard me kind of weave this throughout my talk, is how do we read poetry and wisdom literature? We read it in community. And what I mean by this is we read it in community with the community of the Bible, within its context, having the different books talk to each other, and we actually read it with and among each other. I have been known at some times in my life to say things like, I'm not sure if you should read the Bible by yourself because it's dangerous. My encouragement, so I don't want to go all that way. I do want to say, yes, I want to encourage you, and I will at the very end really encourage you to read the Bible on your own and read it with others in this building. It is so very helpful. All right, let's move on. So our summer series is the summer of 66, and when I was asked to do this speech, I immediately thought of a moment in my life, and it wasn't the summer of 66. I know it was the summer of the 90s. Let's put this, I think it's the next slide on there. Look at this. Look at this. This picture of me, I actually don't know exactly when this was taken, but it was taken sometime in the 90s. I played a lot of guitar back then. I would say I played probably an hour minimum, probably 2 hours every day. And so it's not surprising that this picture was taken. And I want to kind of give a shout out to Jenny McVickver. This is actually a picture that she took of me. We didn't know that we had connected back in the 90s, but we did. And this is from her photo album, which was hilarious. But I played the guitars for hours. And the other thing that happened at that time of my life that I am so super grateful for is I did what I said before, is I read the Bible a lot. I read the Psalms a lot. And I want to encourage you to do that. And I would say these were foundational moments for me. For that, weird-looking guy right there, they were foundational moments for me. And it caused me to journal. And I did a very, I'm going to read our journal entry from September 17th, so summer's just over. September 17th, 1993. This is Scott's 19-year-old self. I'm a little scared. But let's read this. How long, Lord, will the enemy triumph over me? I give up before the fight begins, and I wonder why there is no victory, no joy, no peace. How I long to meet you, Lord, yet I run every time you come. How I long to be healed by your hand, but when I see the shadow, I turn. How long will I bring to you my pain and get silence? Maybe I make too much noise when I drag my feet. That was a weird line. Yet I know that you, great Jehovah, you alone hear my cry. I lift to you my life, my soul, my all. I read this poem, this journal entry, in effort to actually encourage and challenge you. So you've heard me talk a little bit about what and how we should read wisdom literature and poetry in the Bible, but summer is not over, and here is your summer challenge. Read the Psalms. Read them slowly, read them frequently, and then write a psalm. Read the Psalms and write a psalm. I've quickly kind of put together kind of an outline of what you could do, but I'm not even going to read that right now. They're in the questions for after the service. But my challenge to you this summer is read the Psalms and write a psalm. Thanks be to God.
So, first one is, can you explain your take on what the fear of God is?
I think my take, I said it a few times, my take on is exactly what I said, which is God and I am not. It is both that kind of intellectual assent, but it is also a relational declaration. So saying that God is God and I am not is not just about saying what is true. It is also trying to communicate that this is the relational way of being. This is the start. This is the beginning of wisdom, to know that God is the creator of all things of heaven and earth, and that that I am not, and that yet I am part of all of this. Yeah.
Is there a way, this came up so frequently, I'm just curious about how you can you add something to that about how you actually live that out? Like, what does this mean? How conscious are you of this throughout a day?
I probably asked that question of Jana, and she might say less frequent than I would care to admit, perhaps. But let me answer or respond to it this way. So there is an author, his name is Parker Palmer, and he wrote a book called Let Your Life Speak. I often go to this book because he wrote, I think it's in chapter 3, he talks about 5 shadows he talks about 5 shadows of leadership, but I just think that they're 5 shadows of humanity. And I'm not going to get all 5 of them right because I don't have them in front of me right now. But when I think of how does this practically work out for me, I guess let me go at it the other way, which is when I am not living in that reality of God is God and I am not, often what is happening is I'm living into the reality that more of me is what matters most. So if there's a particular problem, or maybe perhaps I'm suffering in a particular way, and my response to that is just more of me, that's a default for me. I'm not saying that's the one that you go to for yourself. Another one that I think happens in this one is that we deny or ignore the pain and suffering. So when we ignore that, that is not helping us actually understand that God is God and God has control of all these things and sees it through. So I'm not fully answering the question, but I would say on a day-to-day basis, it's not like I'm fully conscious of, today I am living out of the fear of the Lord. But I am trying to, on a daily basis, try to see how God is at work. I think that's the reason why we kind of read the scriptures, is kind of it helps reorient us towards God's narrative on a daily basis in our life.
Okay, thank you for that. Early on, the question came up, what do you mean by Proverbs are parabolic?
Well, some of them are. So what we mean by that is, again, this is like more of a technical literary kind of language. That parabolic means that they are hyperbole, like they are speaking larger than what they're actually meaning. So that's what I'll say.
Okay.
I'm not, like, this is where the confession comes in. I seriously, friends, I am not a literature major. Like, seriously, this was not my sweet spot, but we'll get through it.
Okay. I hope you'll have some fun with this one. Here's the question. Does coming to church contribute to improving your life?
The reason why I'm pausing is I want to just say yes. Like, this feels like a yes/no question. Does it improve my life? Yes. How? I would say that it is actually you, all of you, making us and actually then us aligning us, reorienting us to the great story of God in our life in this moment now. I often come away from a Sunday morning as a way of being, it's a deep reminder. Sometimes it comes just directly within our singing. Sometimes it can come through the teaching that comes. Sometimes it comes through an interaction with a particular person, but every time it is a realignment of what God is about in my current moment, my current time. And so yes, that is terribly helpful. Really helps me, and by the grace of God, my contribution, your contribution, helps all of us.
And that's true not only for when we're meeting here, but also for those who are meeting in homes. Like
Absolutely.
This notion of coming together. You talked about reading scripture together, and I sort of thought about that experience and that we do that together, and that's true there too. Yeah, so great. I just want to make this comment for next Sunday, because here's the thing. You talked about how the Psalms are written in couplets, and our summer series has been designed in couplets, right? So today we're talking about the wisdom and poetry books. Next Sunday, Laurel is going to talk about Jesus in the Wisdom and Poetry book. So anyways, I don't know if you've picked up on the couplets of our series.
I did.
But thank you so much, Scott. Why don't you close our service?
Absolutely. Let's stand, if you're able, and here's a blessing. May the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm, and may he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Amen.